Rain fell down hard, turning Susan's white wedding dress into mud. Thunder hit somewhere far away. She barely heard it over her own breathing. The gun shook in her hand. She stared down, her vision blurring, rain and tears mixing. Luca lay at her feet, except for the faint rise of his chest, fighting for breath. The man she had sworn to hate. The man she had been forced to marry. The man who, just moments ago, had looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, betrayal or relief. Susan, he choked, barely getting the word out. His hand, usually unbreakable, reached up toward the hem of her ruined dress. Go. I can't, she whispered, the wind snatching her voice away. I can't leave you. You have to. He coughed, his body seizing with pain. The dark eyes that had terrified half of Chicago were now glazing over, losing their sharp, predatory light. They are coming. If they find you here, with the gun, they will kill you. Run, Susan. Run. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the storm. They were getting closer. Susan looked at the gun in her hand, then at the dying man who was technically her husband. How had it come to this? 3 months ago, she was sitting in a law library, worrying about finals. Now, she was a widow in waiting, standing over the body of a Don. She dropped the gun. It landed in the mud with a dull thud. She fell to her knees, ignoring the grime soaking into the silk, and grabbed Luca's face between her hands. I'm not leaving you, she sobbed, pressing her forehead against his. I'm not leaving you, Luca. You hear me? You don't get to die. You don't get to leave me with this mess. He tried to smile, that arrogant, crooked smirk that used to drive her crazy, but it faltered. His eyes drifted shut. Susan, Tesoro. The sirens were deafening now. Tires screeched on the wet asphalt nearby. Car doors slammed. Police. Drop to your knees. Hands in the air. Susan didn't look up. She just screamed, a primal sound of agony that ripped through the storm, echoing the chaos that had started exactly 90 days ago. If you love stories of forced marriage, dark romance, and survival against all odds, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. Would you have married the Mafia boss to save your father? Or would you fall in love with your enemy? The smell of old paper and coffee was usually Susan's sanctuary. The university library was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the city outside. She tapped her pen against her chin, staring at her textbook like it had betrayed her. You're going to burn a hole in that page if you stare any harder, a deep voice rumbled from the table across from her. Susan looked up, startled. She hadn't realized anyone was sitting there. The man was striking, that was the only word for it. He was wearing a suit that cost more than her tuition, charcoal gray and tailored to perfection. His dark hair was swept back, but it was his eyes that caught her off guard. They were dark, and they were watching her with an unnerving amount of focus. I have an exam in 2 days, Susan said, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. And I'm failing to understand why anyone would voluntarily become a lawyer. The stranger chuckled, a low, rasping sound. To control the rules. Or to know how to break them without getting caught. Susan raised an eyebrow. Is that what you do? Break rules? Something like that, he said, closing the thick leather-bound book he had been reading. He stood up, and Susan realized just how tall he was. He towered over the table, radiating a kind of dangerous power that made the air around him feel charged. I'm Luca. Susan, she replied automatically. Susan, he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a polite mask. Good luck with your exam, Susan. Try not to let the law break you before you break it. He walked away, his footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. Susan watched him go, feeling a strange shiver crawl down her spine. She shook it off, telling herself she was just tired. She had no idea that the man who had just wished her luck was the same man who held the deed to her life. Later that evening, the rain had started, a light drizzle that would eventually turn into the storm in Susan's life. Susan unlocked the front door of her father's house, shaking out her umbrella. Dad, she called out. I'm home. I picked up dinner. Silence. Usually, the TV would be blaring the news, or her father would be in the kitchen clattering pans. Tonight, the house was dark. Too dark. Dad. She dropped her bag and walked into the living room. The lamp in the corner was knocked over. Papers were scattered across the floor, financial documents, bank statements, IOUs. And sitting in his armchair, head in his hands, was her father. Dad. Susan rushed over, kneeling beside him. What happened? Are you hurt? Did someone break in? Her father looked up. His face was pale, aged 10 years in a single day. His eyes were red-rimmed and terrified. Susan, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry for what? Talk to me. I thought I could fix it, he rambled, his voice trembling. I thought if I just had a little more time, the shipment would come through, and I could pay them back. But the shipment was seized. It's all gone, Susan. Everything. Who? Susan demanded, grabbing his shoulders. Pay who back? The Vitiello family, he whispered. Susan's blood ran cold. Everyone in Chicago knew the Vitiello name. They were the shadows in the alleyways, the silence in the witness stands. They weren't loan sharks. They were executioners. How much? She asked, her voice barely audible. 2 million, her father choked out. Plus interest. Susan sat back on her heels, the room spinning. $2 million. They didn't have $2,000 in savings, let alone 2 million. Okay, she said, trying to steady her breathing. Okay, we go to the police. We tell them everything. We get into witness protection. No. Her father grabbed her wrist, his grip painful. No police. If we go to the cops, they kill us both before we even sign the paperwork. You don't understand, Susan. They are coming tonight. To collect. As if on cue, a heavy knock pounded on the front door. Susan jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her father let out a whimper of pure terror. Stay here, Susan said, her voice shaking but her jaw set. She stood up. Susan, don't. She ignored him and walked to the door. She was a law student. She believed in rights, in negotiation, in the system. She would not let some thugs hurt her father. She pulled the door open. 3 men stood on the porch. 2 were massive, wearing trench coats that poorly concealed the bulges of weapons at their waists. But the man in the middle, Susan's breath hitched. It was him, the man from the library. The charcoal suit was dry, despite the rain. He looked at her, not with the polite curiosity he had shown earlier, but with cold, calculated ownership. Hello again, Susan, Lucas said softly. You, she breathed. May we come in? He didn't wait for an answer. He stepped past her, the 2 guards following like silent wraiths. Luca walked straight into the living room, his eyes scanning the mess on the floor before landing on her cowering father. Mr. Rossi, Lucas said, his voice smooth as velvet but sharp as a razor. I believe time is up. Please, her father begged, sliding out of the chair to his knees. Please, Mr. Vitiello. I just need a week. 1 week. I can sell the house. I can. The house is already leveraged. Luca cut him off. We own the bank that holds your mortgage. The house is ours. Your car is ours. Your accounts are frozen. Luca turned, looking at Susan. He looked her up and down, slowly, assessing her like one would assess a racehorse or a piece of art. But there is one asset you kept hidden from the ledger. Susan stepped between Luca and her father. I am not an asset. Get out of my house. The guards tensed, reaching for their jackets, but Luca held up a hand. He smirked, that same dangerous amusement dancing in his eyes. Feisty, Luca murmured. I like that. It will make things more interesting. What do you want? Susan demanded. Your father owes a debt that can only be paid in blood, Lucas said, his tone shifting, becoming deadly serious. Standard protocol is to make him disappear and send a message to others who think they can steal from us. Her father sobbed into his hands. However, Luca continued, stepping closer to Susan until she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and expensive tobacco. I find myself in need of something specific. My father, the Don, is old-fashioned. He believes a man is not fit to lead the family until he is settled, married, respectable. Susan stared at him, horror dawning on her. You have to be joking. I never joke about business, Lucas said. Here is the deal, Susan. You marry me. You play the part of the devoted wife. You attend the galas. You smile for the cameras. You play the role convincingly. In exchange, your father's debt is wiped clean. He lives. You live. And if I say no? Susan challenged, though her voice wavered. Luca's eyes hardened. He pulled a gun from inside his jacket, a sleek, black pistol, and pointed it directly at her father's head. Then I pull the trigger, he said simply. And then I shoot you. And then I go home and have a scotch. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the rain drumming against the roof and her father's jagged breathing. Susan looked at her father, A broken man who had gambled their lives away. Then she looked at Luca, the devil in a bespoke suit. She had a choice: freedom and death, or a cage and life. Fine, Susan whispered, tears stinging her eyes. I'll do it. Luca holstered the gun immediately. The terrifying aura vanished, replaced by that polite library mask. He reached out and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. His skin was cold. Excellent choice, Mrs. Vitiello, he said. Pack a bag. We leave now. The Vitiello estate was less of a house and more of a fortress. High walls topped with barbed wire, cameras swiveling at every corner, and armed guards patrolling the grounds with Dobermans. Inside, however, it was a palace of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and cold, echoing emptiness. Susan had been given a room that was bigger than her entire apartment. The closet was filled with designer clothes in her size: dresses, heels, silk lingerie. It was a gilded cage, terrifying in its luxury. For 2 weeks, Luca was a ghost. Susan stayed locked inside luxury that felt like a cage, guards outside her door, silence inside her chest. Then came the dinner. Tonight, we dine with my father, Luca announced, standing in her doorway one evening. He was adjusting his cufflinks, looking as impeccable as ever. Wear the red dress. And Susan? She looked up from the book she wasn't reading. What? Don't speak unless spoken to. My father is traditional. The dinner was a disaster of tension. Luca's father, Don Salvatore, was a rotting husk of a man, hooked up to an oxygen tank, but still possessing eyes that looked like they had seen hell and enjoyed it. He sat at the head of the table, watching Susan eat with open disdain. She is skinny, Salvatore wheezed, stabbing a piece of steak. Does she breed well? That is the only use for a woman of her station. Susan gripped her fork so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at Luca, expecting him to defend her. He was sipping his wine, his face blank. She is intelligent, father, Luca said calmly. A law student. Smart sons come from smart mothers. Bah, the old man spat. Books make women difficult. You should have married the Moretti girl. Pure bloodlines. The Moretti girl is a screeching harpy, Luca said, setting his glass down. Susan is composed. We will see, Salvatore grunted. If she gives you a son within the year, she stays. If not, he trailed off, drawing a finger across his throat. Susan dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Excuse me, she said, standing up. I've lost my appetite. Sit down. Salvatore barked. No, Susan said, her voice shaking but loud. I am not a broodmare. I am a human being. I agreed to marry your son to save my father, not to be discussed like livestock. The room went silent. The guards by the door shifted their hands to their weapons. Salvatore's face turned purple with rage. Luca, the Don growled. Control your wife. Luca stood up slowly. He walked around the table to where Susan was standing. She braced herself, expecting a slap, a yell, something violent. Instead, Luca turned to his father. She is right, Luca said, his voice ice cold. She is my wife. Which means she carries the Vitiello name now. If you disrespect her, you disrespect me. And I am the one running this family now, father. Not you. Salvatore's eyes bulged. You dare. I dare, Luca said. Come, Susan. He offered her his arm. Susan, stunned, took it. He led her out of the dining room, past the stunned guards, and up the grand staircase. He didn't say a word until they were inside her bedroom. He closed the door and locked it. Then he turned to her, his eyes blazing. Are you insane? He hissed, pacing the room. You do not talk back to him. He has had people skinned for less. I don't care. Susan shouted back, the adrenaline crashing through her. I hate this. I hate you. You talk about me like I'm an object. Smart sons come from smart mothers. Is that all I am to you? A womb. Luca stopped pacing. He stalked toward her, backing her up until she hit the wall. He placed a hand on either side of her head, trapping her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. You have no idea what you are to me, he whispered, his voice rough. You think this is easy? You think I wanted to drag you into this life? I watched you in that library for months before your father messed up. I watched you study. I watched you laugh with your friends. I watched you live a life I can never have. I wanted you to stay safe. I wanted you to stay away from me. Susan stared at him, breathless. You watched me? Yes, Luca admitted, his eyes searching hers. And when I saw your name on that debt list, I knew I had two choices. Let my soldiers kill you, or take you for myself. I saved your life, Susan. Every day you are in this house, I am saving your life. You put a gun to my father's head, Susan reminded him, though her voice lacked its earlier fire. To make you come with me, Lucas said. Because if I had asked nicely, would you have said yes? Would you have married a monster voluntarily? No, she whispered. Exactly. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The tension in the room shifted from fear to something else, something electric and dangerous. I am a bad man, Susan, Lucas said softly. I kill people. I extort cities. I run an empire of blood. But when you stood up to my father downstairs, when you looked him in the eye and told him to go to hell, I have never wanted you more. Susan's heart pounded against her ribs. She should push him away. She should slap him. But her body betrayed her. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. Then why don't you take what you want? She challenged. Luca groaned and crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was possessive, desperate, and hungry. It was a kiss fueled by anger and fear and a strange, twisted attraction that had been brewing since the library. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, both of them panting. This changes things, he murmured. If we cross this line, there is no going back. I was yours the moment you signed that contract, Susan said. No, Lucas said, pulling back to look at her. That was business. This is war. Months passed. The war Lucas spoke of was not just between the sheets, though their nights were filled with a passion that frightened Susan with its intensity. The war was outside the walls. The rival family, the Romanovs, the ones her father had initially tried to work with before turning to the Vitiellos, were encroaching on Lucas' territory. Shipments were being hijacked. Soldiers were being found dead. Susan saw the toll it took on Luca. He came home later and later, smelling of gunpowder and exhaustion. He would collapse into bed beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist as if she was the only anchor keeping him from drifting away. Quit, Susan whispered one night, tracing the fresh scar on his chest. Let's just take the money and leave. We can go to Europe, Asia, anywhere. You can't retire from the Mafia, Susan, Lucas said tiredly into her hair. The only way out is in a box. Don't say that, she scolded. It's the truth. But I promise you this. I will keep you safe. No matter what happens to me, you will be safe. I don't want to be safe without you, she admitted, realizing it was true. Somewhere along the way, amidst the violence and the fear, she had fallen in love with the monster. Then came the wedding day. It was a formality. They were already married on paper, but the families demanded a public ceremony to solidify the alliance and show strength. It was meant to be a coronation. Susan stood in the dressing room of the cathedral, looking at herself in the mirror. The white dress was stunning, costing more than her father's house. Her hair was piled high, adorned with diamonds. She looked like a queen. Knock, knock. She turned. It was Luca. He wasn't supposed to see the bride before the wedding, but rules rarely applied to him. He looked devastating in his tuxedo. You look. He stopped, struggling for words. Breathtaking. Bad luck to see me. Susan smiled nervously. I make my own luck, he said, walking over and kissing her hand. I just wanted to give you this. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a necklace, a simple, elegant silver chain with a small locket. Open it, he said. She did. Inside was a tiny picture of her, taken from a distance while she was sitting on a park bench, laughing. You stalker, she laughed, tears welling up. I told you, he smiled. I've been watching you for a long time. Wear it. Keep it close. I love you, Luca, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Luca froze. His expression crumbled, revealing a vulnerability she had never seen. He cupped her face. I love you, Susan. More than I should. More than is safe. He kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss that felt like a goodbye. I'll see you at the altar, he said, turning to leave. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows were spoken. The priest pronounced them man and wife. The applause was thunderous. And then, the first shot rang out. It happened in slow motion. The stained glass window high above the altar shattered, raining colored shards down on the guests. A red dot appeared on Luca's chest. Luca, Susan screamed. He moved instantly, not to save himself, but to shield her. He tackled her to the ground just as the second, third, and fourth shots tore through the air where she had been standing. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed and trampled each other. Luca's soldiers returned fire, shooting blindly at the balcony. Luca dragged Susan behind the marble altar. "Are you hit?" he shouted, patting her down frantically. "Susan, look at me. Are you hit?" "No. I'm fine. I'm fine," she cried. "Luca, you're bleeding." He looked down. His white shirt was soaking red. A sniper round had caught him in the shoulder, close to the collarbone. "It's fine," he gritted out. Flesh wound. "We have to move. They're coming in the back." "Who?" "The Romanovs. It's a coup. My capos, some of them turned. We were betrayed." He pulled a gun from his waistband. He was armed even at his own wedding, and handed it to her. "Do you know how to use this?" "No. Point and pull. Safety is off. If anyone comes near you who isn't me, you kill them. Do you understand?" "Luca, I can't." "You have to," he roared, his eyes wild. "Susan, fight." He grabbed another gun from a fallen bodyguard and peered over the altar. "Cover me. I'm going to clear the side exit." He stood up and fired 3 shots. 2 men in masks dropped. He turned to wave her forward. That was when the second bullet hit him. This one wasn't a flesh wound. It hit him in the stomach, spinning him around. He collapsed, crashing down the altar steps. "No!" Susan shrieked. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy gun with both hands, stood up, and saw the man running toward Luca with a knife. He was a Romanov soldier. She pointed the gun. Point and pull. Bang. The recoil nearly dislocated her shoulder. She fired. He dropped. Susan scrambled down the steps, sliding in the blood that was slicking the floor. She reached Luca. He was gasping, clutching his stomach. "Up," she sobbed, pulling his arm. "Get up, Luca. Please." "Can't," he wheezed. "Too much." "No." She dragged him. She didn't know where she found the strength. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was love. She dragged a 200-pound man through the side door and out into the alleyway. The storm had started. The rain was pouring down, washing the blood from his shirt onto her dress. She collapsed in the alley, unable to drag him any further. She fell to her knees, the gun still in her hand. And that was where they were now. The sirens were close. The police, or worse, the Romanovs on the payroll, were seconds away. "Susan," Luca whispered, his eyes fluttering. "The locket." "What?" she cried, leaning down. "The locket. Inside, there is a key. A key to a safe deposit box in Zurich. Money. Passports. A new life." He had planned this. He knew this might happen. He had prepared an escape hatch for her. "I don't want the money," she wept. "I want you." "You can't have me," he said, a tear sliding down his cheek to mix with the rain. "I'm done, Tesoro. But you are going to live. Promise me." "Luca, please. Promise me." He coughed, his voice broke. "I promise," she whispered. "Good." He smiled, his eyes fixing on hers one last time. "I love." His breath hitched. His chest stopped rising. The hand holding her dress went slack. "Luca." No answer. "Luca." She shook him. She screamed his name. But the king of Chicago was gone. Susan sat there in the rain, the new widow, the accidental killer. The sirens stopped. Car doors opened. Footsteps splashed in the puddles. She looked at the gun in her hand. She looked at the locket around her neck. She had promised him she would live. She stood up. The grief was a physical weight, crushing her lungs, but a cold, hard rage was beginning to form beneath it. They had taken him. They had ruined everything. The police rounded the corner, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon." Susan looked at them. She looked at Luca's body one last time. She dropped the gun. She raised her hands. But as the officers rushed forward to cuff her, Susan Rossividiello didn't cry. She stared at the rain, her eyes dry and burning. Luca was dead, but she was alive. And she knew where the money was. She knew who the traitors were. She wasn't just a law student anymore. She was a Vidiello. And she was going to burn the Romanov Empire to the ground. The metal table was bolted to the floor, cold enough to seep through the thin silk of her ruined wedding dress. Susan sat shivering, her hands cuffed to the steel bar running along the table's edge. The blood, Luca's blood, had dried into a stiff, dark crust on her skin and the expensive fabric, flaking off with every tremor that racked her body. She stared at the two-way mirror, seeing nothing but her own hollow reflection. Her mascara had tracked black tears down her cheeks, making her look like a ghost of the bride she was supposed to be just hours ago. The door buzzed and swung open. A detective walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He didn't offer her one. He sat down opposite her, taking a slow, noisy sip while staring at her over the rim. He was older, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and exhausted patience. Detective Miller. She knew him. Not personally, but from Luca's files. He was on the payroll, but not the Vitiello payroll. Rough night, Mrs. Vitiello, Miller said, his voice grating like sandpaper. He placed a file on the table. Though I suppose it's Ms. Rossi again, isn't it? Technically. Susan didn't blink. She focused on a scratch in the metal table. If she looked at him, she would scream, and if she started screaming, she wouldn't stop. We found the gun, Miller continued, leaning back. Your prints are all over it. We have witnesses who saw you shoot a man in the church. We have ballistics matching the bullet in the victim's neck to the weapon found in your possession. It's an open and shut case, Susan. Murder one. It was self-defense, Susan whispered, her voice hoarse. Self-defense. Miller laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You shot a man who was fleeing the scene. He was running toward my husband with a knife, Susan snapped, her eyes finally locking onto his. He was a Romanov soldier. And you know it. Miller's smile faded. He leaned forward, the smell of stale coffee and cigarettes wafting across the table. Careful, sweetheart. You start throwing names around. You might find yourself hanging in your cell before your arraignment. This isn't a law school mock trial. This is Chicago. And in Chicago, the Romanovs are very upset about the mess your husband made. My husband didn't make the mess, Susan said, her voice steadying as the cold rage began to thaw the shock in her chest. He was ambushed at his own wedding. By cowards. He's dead, Miller said bluntly. He's on a slab in the morgue right now. And you're here. And unless you want to spend the next 40 years in a federal prison, you're going to sign this. He slid a piece of paper toward her. It was a confession. But not just a confession to the shooting in the church. It was a statement implicating Luca in a dozen unsolved murders, declaring the Vitiello Empire a criminal enterprise, and agreeing to turn state's witness against Luca's remaining lieutenants. Why would I sign that? Susan asked, glancing at the text. He's dead. You can't prosecute a corpse. No, Miller lowered his voice. But we can seize his assets. We can dismantle his organization. And if you sign this, we can offer you a deal. Manslaughter. 2 years. Out in 1 with good behavior. You disappear. Start over. Susan stared at the paper. It was a way out. A way to survive, just like Luca had wanted. Promise me you'll live. But signing this meant destroying everything Luca had built. It meant spitting on his memory. It meant letting the Romanovs win. She looked up at Miller. I want my lawyer. Miller sighed, disappointed. I was hoping you'd be smart. Your father was a fool, but I thought you had potential. My lawyer, Susan repeated. Now? Or anything I say is inadmissible. Miller stood up, scraping his chair against the floor. Have it your way. But just so you know, there are no lawyers coming for you. The Vitiello accounts are frozen. The associates are scattering like roaches. You're alone, Susan. The door slammed shut. The lock buzzed. Susan squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the panic. Think. Think like a lawyer. Think like Luca. She was alone. Miller was right about that. The Vitiello Empire was built on strength, and with the king dead, the structure would collapse instantly. The loyalists would go to ground. The traitors would join the Romanovs. She was a liability to everyone. Minutes turned into hours. The cold seeped into her bones. She laid her head on the table, the image of Luca's dying face replaying on a loop in her mind. The locket. Her hand went to her neck, clutching the cold metal silver heart. He had given it to her right before the ceremony. It was the only piece of jewelry the police hadn't stripped from her, likely thinking it was cheap sentimentality. Inside was a key to a box in Zurich. But Zurich was 4,000 miles away, and she was cuffed to a table in the 12th precinct. Suddenly, the door buzzed again. Susan didn't lift her head, expecting Miller to return with more threats. Get up, a voice said. It wasn't Miller. The voice was smooth, cultured, and laced with a razor-sharp edge. Susan looked up. Standing in the doorway was a man she recognized. Daniel, Luca's consigliere, his advisor, his best friend. Daniel looked impeccable in a navy suit, holding a briefcase. But his eyes were red-rimmed, and there was a tightness around his jaw that betrayed his composure. He looked at Susan, his gaze softening momentarily as he took in her blood-stained dress. Daniel, she breathed. Mrs. Vitiello, he nodded formally. He turned to the uniformed officer behind him. Uncuff her. She's made bail. The officer looked unhappy about it, but he stepped forward and unlocked the cuffs. Susan rubbed her raw wrists, standing up on shaky legs. Bail? She asked, her voice trembling. Miller said the accounts were frozen. He said no one was coming. Miller is a low-level thug with a badge, Daniel said, guiding her out of the room with a hand on her back. He underestimates the contingencies Luca put in place. Walk. Do not look at anyone. Do not speak to anyone. They moved quickly through the precinct. The station was chaotic, phones ringing, officers shouting. Susan felt eyes on her, hostile, predatory glares. She kept her head down, focusing on Daniel's polished shoes. They pushed through the heavy double doors and out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and reflecting the neon lights. A black SUV was idling at the curb, engine purring. Daniel opened the back door for her. Susan climbed in, sinking into the leather seat. It smelled like Luca. It was his car. The scent of sandalwood and tobacco hit her so hard, she almost retched with grief. Daniel slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. He didn't drive away immediately. He turned around to face her. Are you hurt? He asked. Physically. No, Susan said, touching the dried blood on her bodice. This isn't mine. Daniel nodded tightly. He took a deep breath, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I am sorry, Susan. I should have been there. I was handling security at the perimeter. By the time I got inside. Who did it? Susan asked, her voice turning hard. Who betrayed us? Lucas said his capos turned. It was Robert. Daniel spat the name like a curse. Robert and Sal. They opened the side doors for the Romanov hit squad. They sold us out for a promise of territory. Are they dead? Not yet, Daniel said, starting the car. But they will be. He pulled out into traffic, driving aggressively. Susan watched the city blur past. Where are we going? The estate. No, Daniel said, checking the rearview mirror. The estate is compromised. The police are tearing it apart right now, looking for evidence. And if the police aren't there, the Romanovs will be waiting for you. We're going to a safe house. One that isn't on the books. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, winding through the industrial district until they reached a nondescript warehouse. Daniel used a remote to open a rusted garage door, drove inside, and let it close behind them before killing the engine. We change cars here, he said. They switched to a battered sedan. Daniel handed her a duffel bag. Clothes. Clean ones. And a phone. It's a burner. One number is programmed in it. Mine. Susan took the bag, clutching it to her chest. Daniel, what do I do? Luca is gone. I'm nobody in this world without him. Daniel looked at her, his expression grim. You are his wife. You are the sole heir to everything he built that isn't tied to the family trust. But right now, you are a target. The Romanovs won't stop until you're dead. They know you saw their faces. I killed one of them, Susan said. Daniel paused. A flicker of respect crossed his face. I heard. Luca taught you well. He didn't teach me anything, Susan whispered. I just didn't want him to die alone. Daniel looked away, clearing his throat. There is a flight arranged for you. Tomorrow morning. Private charter out of a small airfield in Indiana. It will take you to Sicily. From there, you can go to Zurich. Access the safe box. Disappear. Disappear, Susan repeated. The word tasted like ash. That's what Miller offered me too. Run away. Hide. It is the only logical choice, Daniel said. We have lost the war, Susan. The Vitiello family is shattered. Without Luca, there is no one to rally the soldiers. The Romanovs have won. Susan thought about the man in the rain. She thought about the way Luca had looked at her father, how he had taken a debt of blood and turned it into a marriage to save her life. She thought about the way he had shielded her with his own body. He hadn't run. He hadn't hidden. She looked at the locket again. Promise me you'll live. But was hiding living? Or was it just a slower kind of death? No, Susan said. Daniel blinked. Excuse me. I'm not going to Zurich, she said, her voice gaining strength. I'm not running. Susan, be reasonable, Daniel said, his voice rising. This isn't a movie. These people will torture you before they kill you. You have no soldiers. You have no power. I have the money, Susan said. Luca said there is money in Zurich. Yes, millions. But you have to go there to get it. Then I'll go there, get it, and come back, Susan said. I'm going to buy the war back, Daniel. Daniel stared at her, stunned. You want to hire mercenaries? To fight the Romanovs? I want to burn them, Susan said, her eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. I want Robert and Sal to suffer. I want the Romanov Don to know exactly who killed him. I am a Vitiello. I am not running. Daniel watched her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a dark smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a wolf recognizing another wolf. Luca was right about you, Daniel murmured. He told me once that you had iron in your spine. I didn't believe him. I thought you were just a soft civilian. I was, Susan said, opening the door of the sedan. But they killed her today too. The safe house was a small apartment above an abandoned bakery. It was dusty, smelling of disuse, but it was secure. Susan showered, scrubbing the blood off her skin until she was raw and pink. She watched the red water swirl down the drain, imagining it was her weakness washing away. She dressed in the clothes Daniel had provided, black jeans, a black turtleneck, heavy boots. Practical. Tactical. She pulled her hair back into a tight ponytail. She sat on the edge of the sagging bed and opened the locket. The tiny key glinted in the dim light. She needed to get to Zurich. But first, she needed to know exactly what she was dealing with. She turned on the burner phone. One message waiting. It wasn't from Daniel. Susan frowned. No one had this number. Daniel had just given it to her. She opened the message. It was a video file. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her thumb hovered over the play button. She pressed it. The screen flickered to life. The camera angle was low, set up on a dashboard of a car. It was night. Rain was falling. The video showed the alleyway. The alleyway where she had left Luca. Susan gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. In the video, she saw herself, drenched, screaming, being dragged away by the police. The camera lingered on Luca's body lying in the mud. He was still dead. Then, the police cars drove away with her. The alley was empty, save for the corpse. A minute passed in the video. Nothing moved. Then, a black van pulled up. 4 men jumped out. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They were wearing tactical gear, but no insignias. They moved with military precision. They approached Luca's body. One of them knelt down and checked his pulse. The man looked back at the others and nodded. Susan stopped breathing. Nodded? Why would he nod? They carefully lifted Luca onto a stretcher. They didn't treat him like a corpse. They treated him like a patient. They hooked up in 4-bag immediately. They put an oxygen mask over his face. They treated him. Oxygen. IVs. You don't give oxygen to a dead man. Susan's knees went weak. If Luca wasn't dead, then someone had stolen her husband. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, don't go anywhere. Part 2 is even more intense. Susan believed Luca is alive. Will she save Luca? Will she get her revenge? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2. Drop a comment below. Would you risk everything to save someone who dragged you into hell? See you in the next one.